Hi everybody, it's great to be here today. And I really want to thank SGA for the opportunity to spend some time with you, also discussing some of the themes that Brett really put together very, very nicely. And I'm not going to not only congratulate what you did, but on 3 hours sleep, Brett, that's really impressive. I think some of the key themes that we're going to be talking about today are going to include what you already know, which is the importance of your role in a dynamic environment. And also, as Brett talked about, it's important to be proactive, to actually use uncertainty to your advantage, and to have a sense that this is the time where your skill set is going to drive the conversation, not in terms of, not only as we'll discuss, of what the company built, but what comes next. Because as we heard about, a single tweet can actually move markets, and importantly, a cyber disruption can bring down entire critical infrastructure. As we've also seen on day-to-day, a policy initiative, a change in export controls, a change in sanctions, a different way of looking at a particular matter in policy can actually change the direction of the entirety of your business management trajectory. And we have to be able to react to those particular times. But as corporate security professionals, and it was mentioned earlier, some of the best in the business in this room, you are no stranger to this reality. You recognize that the reason why you're here and you are actually put up with regard to those responsibilities is because of the recognition of the importance of your role. And so what I'd like to talk to you about is that because the stakes have never been higher, and you know that you are no longer protecting just physical assets, your role is vital in actually moving the organization as it navigates the shifting sands of global risk, whereas uncertainty is really the only constant that we're dealing with. But as part of today's conversation, I think we can actually learn how to embrace those challenges with your skill sets. As we talked about, and we'll talk about some more, the Trump administration's policies to all the way through cyber disruption and particular areas that we'll actually be hinging on just a little bit, because we're dealing with a topic that can actually be conversations for days, not just minutes, but it will be an opportunity for you to understand what it means to lead in a dynamic age. Now, this ever-shifting landscape, I think, actually is reflected in my own experiences as a national security professional for decades. When I first started national security, the key focus was actually on counterterrorism threats in the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks. And it was on terrorist organizations and militias in areas of concern around the world that could use their maliciousness to touch here at home as they did. But that then transferred into actually a more dynamic threat that we touched upon a little bit with regard to cyber threats. Vectors that were actually transitioned not just for hackers and hoodies, but then to nation state actors. And we learned about and understood the devastating nature of that harm. And so that, as the national security cyber specialist in Washington, D.C., was a day in, day out effort that I had. That then transitioned, moving from the Department of Justice to the Commerce Department, to more strategic threats with regard to understanding the role of export controls and leading the legal team with regard to those initiatives, as well as the tariff-related initiatives that the Commerce Department led, to use those as part of the national security apparatus, understanding that we actually had to understand the strategic place that the United States had and where the challenges were with other countries. And I think this particular context, the shifting dynamics of national security, are reflected in my own role after 25 years in government service, transitioning to private practice as a partner in the international trade group at Akin Gump, understanding and working with businesses on a day-to-day basis on the challenges that they face, navigating these complexities in a variety of different roles, building on those experiences. Export controls, sanctions, or cyber or otherwise, are things that are on the minds of businesses constantly. So with that in mind, let's just turn briefly to the landscape of what we're actually dealing with. So with regard to this dynamic environment, I think we can all agree that a pivotal shift at home has been with regard to the Trump administration. Importantly, regardless of your political orientation, I think we all understand that there has been a dynamic shift that we must account for. And you have to understand that it's rethinking of longstanding agreements that America may have with other countries. It actually is transforming and relooking at U.S. alliances. It's reshaping regimes that we've actually understood to be constant for years, whether it's export control or sanctions or how we're engaging with our partners to actually protect what's at home and dearest to us. And this is all in an effort to actually meet the national security goals of this administration. Now, clearly, one of the hallmarks of this administration has been the use of tariffs, and we've seen a particular focus with regard to that particular tool as part of the geopolitical toolkit. There's been a focus on bilateral engagement rather than the more multilateral engagement of the prior administration. One recent example of this is actually the stated willingness to terminate negotiations with Canada, even Canada, over its digital service tax, which ultimately resulted in swiftly turning back that policy initiative with regard to Canada dropping that targeted aspect against U.S. tech firms. Or leveraging tariffs to address other concerns in the national security landscape, whether actually dealing with China or other countries, and also just using tariffs as a whole to rebalance entire shaping of economies from numerous countries, including those closer to home with regard to recent threats of a 30% rate increase on Mexico and even the EU. And to briefly talk more about just the landscape, it would be how President Trump has continued his novel use and expansion of export controls to forward his national security objectives, such as key actors like Huawei to deal with advanced computing proliferation. And what we've seen is his willingness to actually use those tools in novel ways, where he actually recently imposed and then took off export controls on a variety of different manners of actually products that were never thought of to be within necessarily that level of focus. And some types of software, semiconductors, there was GE and others with regard to concerns with regard to the equipment and aircraft related parts, and others in the industry that were reportedly affected with regard to those. And of course, there's actually shipments of ethane that were actually involved in the national security controls. Ethane, which was traditionally not considered to be a national security threat, subject to concern. And also we've seen that the Commerce Department continues to add Chinese actors to their actually controls list, the entity list, to address AI and other advanced computing sector concerns. The Trump administration has once again leveraged the existing tools in novel ways, adding to the uncertainty of our dynamic landscape. Now, more than ever, U.S. firms have to not only assess what they're doing, but also what others are doing that they're working with, whether it be their customers or others in the supply chain, and that all starts with the security professionals who are actually in this room. The Trump administration has also reacted not only to what were seen as long-standing considerations, but also new and evolving threats across the international landscape with regard to actually areas that were not even on the minds of security professionals just a short time ago. For example, reacting to the fall of the Assad regime, there was actually immediate relief that was provided, opening up new business opportunities in Syria that had previously not thought to be attainable. And of course, there is the continuing resolve to actually address what's happening in Russia with regard to the Russia war in Ukraine, and leveraging all tools in the toolkit in unconventional ways, looking at economic, military, and diplomatic means to actually bring some sort of resolution to it. And so in short, the corporate security understanding is clear. You have to be able to navigate these areas. And as Brett eloquently said in his opening statement, you understand better than others that this core mission set with regard to cyber also remains clear. What we've actually seen is that we're moving past isolated incidents, and this is a normal part of your day-to-day business understanding it. Brett talked about CrowdStrike and how you actually had a flawed update that led to vulnerabilities across industry, whether it was grounding flights, delaying surgeries, and reportedly costing billions of dollars with regard to economic harm. And importantly, that was an unintentional vulnerability, not to mention their intentional efforts that are actually being made to harm U.S. industry. The United States government, through the Department of Justice, just recently announced its actually effort to go after North Korean actors that were infiltrating U.S. companies through their work of having North Korean nationals and those that they sponsored to actually work as IT workers in those companies to bring back money to the North Korean, and they were able to infiltrate over 100 U.S. firms, and including many Fortune 500 companies. This is the sophistication that we're actually dealing with. And of course, the FBI continues to talk about renewed ransomware attacks and how foreign adversaries are continuing to grow more malicious and more sophisticated and state-sponsored all the time. But this all leads us to what your new mandate is with regard to the gatekeeper as a strategic partner in the business. And what does this mean for your role? You're no longer the person that has to evaluate and potentially say no to risk. You're a strategic partner guiding the company through global complexity. The new mandate requires you to move beyond compliance and become an architect of resilience. And as part of this discussion, I'd like to respectfully suggest 4 suggestions with regard to your day-to-day to how to actually conceptualize and importantly operationalize addressing these risks. And to help you understand, I would suggest that you think of the word risk, R-I-S-K. Now first, the R, real-time intelligence. And there's a lot of people in this room that work through that day to day. And actually the sponsors of the events can attest to that. It is important that you leverage your understanding of that geopolitical risk on a minute-by-minute basis. We started this talking about how even a tweet can move markets, and that's how dynamic this environment is. It's important to actually look through that threat intelligence, have platforms that you can trust, and internally have horizon scanning schemes that can make you more informed and better able to react to those purposes when they actually occurred, and to also lead into the future. It's important to be able to diversify. So for example, in the export control context, those firms that were able to navigate, importantly, the potential trajectory of stricter controls under the last administration were best positioned to adjust their supply chains to keep those possible areas open for their business. Then there's the I in risk, integrated security with business strategy. Partner with product, legal, compliance team, and others as part of the decision-making process. Security must be part of the go, no-go calculus for entering new markets, choosing suppliers, and launching your products, regardless of where they are overseas to be sold. If you're expanding into new markets, cloud-based services, or sourcing components around the globe, these security considerations should be first and foremost in understanding what could happen to that success and driving the conversation. The S, supply chain diversification. Geopolitical shocks aren't theoretical anymore. COVID-19, Red Sea shipping disruptions, even the Russia invasion of Ukraine, all force companies to rethink just-in-time logistics and make accommodations in real time. And finally, number 4, a knowledge culture, and is part of the reason that we're all here today, learning not from what just the panelists and others are going to be speaking of, but actually learning from each other. It's important for us to understand that in that dynamic environment, there's going to be dynamic thought leadership, and we should lean on each other to better understand how to address it. Because at the end of the day, security is a team sport. Everyone from the intern to the CEO should recognize within the company its importance. And so, in short, that I hope this helps reframe uncertainty not as a threat, but actually as the defining feature of our era, and one that smart organizations can prepare for and leverage to their advantage. Your role isn't just to help protect what the company has built, but also to enable what comes next. The most resilient companies aren't necessarily the ones with the biggest security budgets. They're the ones with security professionals like yourself who are embedded, informed, and empowered. It's the security teams that are ready not just to respond, but to lead. And so with this environment in mind, I just want to thank you all for taking this time and hope you all have a great conference. Thanks, Mike.